Nick Pope. I used to work at the Ministry of Defence, and in the early 90s I had a job which included looking at UFO sightings reported to the department. Today, the National Archives are making available the first batch of these formerly classified files. Let's have a look. Here at the National Archives there are actually 170 kilometres of corridors with files in, spanning 1,000 years. Many of the older UFO files have been available here for some time. There's immense interest in the subject of UFOs from the media, the whole UFO research community, and the public as a whole. In fact, when it comes to Freedom of Information Act requests, UFOs is one of the most popular subjects that's consistently asked about. These existing UFO files, which have been available at the National Archives for some years, these ones date from the early 70s. Here we've got, yes, an unknown track appeared. This is obviously talking about radar here. It's always a very interesting question. People see a UFO, that's one thing, but if something is then tracked on radar at the same time, and if the Air Force can verify that, that's obviously hugely significant. This is absolutely fascinating stuff. I mean, people will have their own areas of interest, but some of the personal highlights for me, I was interested and slightly amused to see a very interesting case where a whole bunch of staff and customers at a pub actually saw a bright white light with red and green lights on either side, and I think the clincher in this case was that when asked what direction this was, they said, well, it was in the direction of Gatwick Airport. I think possibility that might have been an aeroplane. 24/1922. There's a very interesting illustration of the fact that actually UFOs are seen in built-up areas. People have this idea they're seen in desolate rural places. Here was a sighting actually on Waterloo Bridge, when a number of witnesses actually stopped to look at this UFO that was seen over the Thames. Another interesting report in file DEFI 31/172 is a slightly more difficult to explain report of almost a classic Close Encounters of the Third Kind type spaceship. I mean, this thing was described as being the size of a football pitch, essentially saucer-shaped with coloured lights on it. So something like that is slightly more difficult to explain away as just an aircraft light or something like that. There's a fascinating document in file DEFI 24/1923. This one involves two UFOs being tracked on military radar, and they're seen to cover 10 nautical miles in about 12 seconds. Now, if that's accurate, the UFO was travelling at about 3,500 miles an hour. Obviously, radar is critical to any meaningful investigation of UFOs. It's one thing just to have eyewitness testimony, but if that's backed up by radar evidence, then it takes the investigation to a whole new level. There's an intriguing letter in file DEFI 31/175 from an ex-RAF serviceman who describes how in 1952 he and a number of other military witnesses at a base in the Far East, effectively the airfield was buzzed by a UFO, and it does seem as if it was tracked on radar as well. There are some slightly more bizarre reports in these files. One of my favourites refers to a man who claimed to have been in physical and psychic contact with an extraterrestrial being called Algar, who tragically was then killed in a battle with a group of other space beings. Another of my favourites from the slightly more bizarre material in these files is the old man who claims that he was actually taken on to a spaceship which had landed near Aldershot, and just when he thought that he was going to be taken for a flight, they said to him, "You can go, you're too old and infirm for our purposes." UFOs can be easily explained as misidentifications of something quite ordinary. When you look at these files, it's quite clear that in most instances what you're dealing with is well-intentioned witnesses, but people who are nonetheless misidentifying things. The most common things misidentified and reported as UFOs are aircraft lights, bright stars and planets, satellites, meteors, fireballs, airships, things like that. I think with the greatest of respect to the general public, the files that people will find more interesting are cases where the witnesses are, for example, police officers or pilots. And there are some interesting cases like that in these files. One of my favourite reports is in file DEFI 24/1924. It's a sighting from a pilot, and they do sometimes see and report UFOs. There's a comment about an object passing 1.5 nautical miles from the port side of the aircraft, and there's a comment it's either A, a meteor, B, space debris re-entering the atmosphere, or C, a missile. And then there's a remark afterwards, if it's a missile, myself and my crew are not impressed. In file DEFI 31/173, there's a fascinating report. It talks about members of the public seeing a UFO. They call the police send people out, and then the police officers sent to the scene ended up seeing the UFO themselves, and actually making a sketch of it. All in all, this is a great day for open government and freedom of information. There's massive interest in these MOD files, and they're available now at the National Archives. The National Archives have put together a special site for all this material. There are links to the files, links to some previous files, a podcast, a research guide, and again, all this can be found at nationalarchives.gov.uk/UFOs.